Welcome to the Truman Charities podcast. I am Jamie Truman, your host. Have you realized that our country has been actively trying to help individuals that are in poverty for over 60 years, but yet the numbers have only been increasing? I had the most fascinating conversation with the co-founder of the Shared Humanity Project, Mark Brugel. Mark speaks about how he realized that the nonprofit sector has become too institutionalized. The truth is that we are treating the symptoms of poverty, but not the cause. That's why 97% of people born in poverty in East Baltimore never get out of poverty. He touches on the argument for minimum wage and how he thinks it's flawed, how you cannot have the same plan for every city in the US. It must be much more well thought out. Mark wants to finally get to the root cause of poverty and not just put a Band-Aid on the issue. I really hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jamie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. It was so wonderful talking to you a few weeks back. And I want to get into your background and exactly why you decided to become the co-founder of the Shared Humanity Project. But first, I want you to tell us a little bit about the organization. What exactly is it?
Thank you for asking that question, because I think first, whenever you talk about poverty, you have to realize, not you, but people have to realize that it's a life or death issue, right? I mean, tonight, 3 people will get shot in Baltimore. They'll all be experiencing economic instability. That's poverty. And that's the same in almost every city. I mean, the number may vary. DC, it may be 1 tonight. That's how the numbers play out, 1 to 2 people. And so I think that we have to see that it is a crisis. And that's why I co-founded the Shared Humanity Project, because in all my work prior in the nonprofit sector, and we did some good work in different places where I was at a wider circle. And before that, I worked for American University. But I just don't think anywhere in the country I see the kind of commitment that will change what's happening. It's not a coincidence that also in Baltimore, about 1 out of every 10 kids can do math at grade level in public schools. And in 23 of the public schools, you can't find a single student who can do math at grade level. And at the same time, the violence is increasing. So I think this is a crisis, and I think it's a crisis of our perspective of how we exist, right? I think that we see problems like that and we think, oh, that's too bad. And we almost feed a system that is very sympathetic, but not effective. Mm-hmm. And I had to start co-found the Shared Humanity Project because I don't want my personal legacy to be, hey, I tried, I did something good. That's not enough. I see everybody as my brother, my sister. And therefore, when one of them gets shot, I think, what would I do if I really did live in the home with them? What would I do? I certainly wouldn't say, oh, that's too bad. Maybe I can provide food on the weekend or adopt a family for the holidays. That's the scope of this, Jamie. I don't mean to come across too intense, but we better, I think, as a country, start getting more urgent in our actions and in what we tolerate for our fellow human beings.
Okay. And so, I was watching your News 4 segment, and you said that you want to come up with fair and equitable opportunities within the community. Now, what exactly do you mean by that?
I said fair and equitable opportunities, huh? That was my quote.
Yes.
Well, I would say what we need to do is go to each sector, right? So I think if people can't find employment that allows them to put away savings, right? When we know most of the country is not able to do that, never mind the segment that's in poverty, and never mind further in deep poverty. So who do we go to provide those employment opportunities? We go to the business sector. So I personally think the business sector can do more to end poverty, or let me just say address economic instability, than any other sector, including the government. So I think this is, the answer to poverty is in the mirror, no matter who's looking in it, right? That's the answer. Each of us engaging as if our family member is living in a crisis. So I guess when I think about equitable opportunities, I think about just opportunities. I am actually not worried about equality. I'm not. I don't think, we don't start equal, right? There's a lot of research on which child comes out, with a higher IQ. So equality is not a part of it, but opportunity is a big part of it, right? That's what we have to make sure everybody has the opportunity. So I try to get caught up more in what leads people to be independent than anything else.
Okay. Well, give me a little bit of an example about exactly what your organization does.
We have these poverty forums, right? So we had one in DC in April, and we brought together about 50 people, and we were very purposeful to have people from every sector. In other words, we didn't want just nonprofit folks or folks from philanthropy or folks from the government. We wanted people from faith communities, civic associations, education, healthcare, and we bring those folks together and we say, look, let's first start by listening to some people who have firsthand experience. So these poverty forums start with a discussion with people who have either risen out of poverty or are in it. And listening to those folks is what we do too little of, right? I've been in a lot of meetings, Jamie, where we're talking about poverty. You know who's not there? People in poverty. And yet we're making decisions on their lives, and we're making value judgments on their lives and on their decisions without really understanding firsthand what it's like to be born and raised in poverty. So we have these poverty forums. It starts with the panel, and then we break off into these working groups from every sector, right? And these working groups take our national plan and say, we like that action that you recommend. We have 300 actions in our national plan. And they pick one and they decide how they're going to implement that. Now, this is all very new because our first forum was just in April. Our second one is in September in Baltimore for obvious reasons. And that's an example of what we do. Another example is we write. So I'm writing a book, and I shouldn't have said that because it's not done. And everybody can say they're writing a book. I'm writing a book. You know what I mean? But that's what I think another contribution that we can make, and a book that tells the truth about poverty. And the truth is very different than the narrative that we usually pay attention to and follow. And by the way, fund. So
tell me a little bit about those truths.
The truth is that we treat the symptoms of poverty and not the cause. That we, for example, we fund ideas that sound great without really knowing the outcomes. And we do it year after year. I was once in a hearing, and it was a local government hearing, and I was with a few other nonprofit leaders. And the council members said to one of the other nonprofit leaders, we gave you $300,000 last year. What was the outcome of that? And the leader said, we have a sewing circle of 5 women, and we think that within a year, some of them will be able to create a business that produces some income for their family. And they said, that's the total outcome. And they said, yes. Well, if we gave you $300,000 again, what would you do? And he went into another great conversation about how these families need opportunities. They gave him $300,000 with really no outcomes. I think that's a mistake because those are taxpayer dollars. I don't want to keep funding programs that sound good. And I, by the way, have been guilty of that in my life, of saying things and not making sure that we produce the outcome that I talked about. That doesn't mean I was a bad person or that person was bad. I know exactly what happened, right? The council members and that individual talked about this well beforehand. It was a done deal. We didn't need to go through kind of the drama and the play of a hearing. They knew they were going to get the funds. And that's a problem. And Jamie, it happens everywhere that we fund good ideas and we don't have to produce. The government and the nonprofit sectors are the 2 sectors we look to solve poverty. Now, I don't think we need to do that, and we can talk about that more. But we do that, but we don't hold them. We don't hold their feet to the fire in terms of outcomes. We don't. So that to me is a truth of poverty. And we just accept narratives that have been around for 50 years that just haven't shown to be true. I think I read a report last year from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, or it was one of those organizations, and it talked about how we're doing better. And all we have to do is give more money to government programs and we'll do even better. And I thought, look, we're 60 years into the war on poverty. 60 years. When we launched the war on poverty, 1 out of every 5 Americans did not have enough to get by on their own. We're 60 years in, and now it's 1 out of every 4 don't have enough to get by on their own. So we're doing a lot worse. And I don't think we should keep feeding a system that does that. I think we should say, hey, what can we do differently? This is a time for heightened social awareness, yet people in poverty and poverty as a whole is left behind.
Yeah, it does seem, in my opinion, I may be incorrect, but it seems that the poverty is really increasing. And it's not getting any better from what I've listened to with other people in San Francisco.
You know what,
yes.
Yeah, I'm going to say that that's absolutely true. And it's where you and I have common ground. not because we see that, but because we both feel like when you bring people together, good things happen, right? I think that's really at the core of what you all do. And it's beautiful because that is the answer. Let's bring people together. There is a real drive to divide us, right? A lot of folks want to divide us because it helps their selfish cause. Poverty is one of the negatives that result from people fragmenting, right? It's a casualty of war, if you will, if the war is our attention, right? And I think that what we need to do is say, hey, how do we come together? And that's what the national plan is all about. That's why the name of our organization is the Shared Humanity Project, because if there's one thing on which we can agree, it's that we share our humanity, right? We are all human beings. And if we focus on that and don't get caught up or pulled away from what we have in common to what is different about us, then I think we have a chance to succeed with this. And that may sound Pollyannish, but I'm really not interested in continuing the status quo approach.
Because it's not working. Yeah,
it's
as
not
you
working.
said, it's not working. The numbers don't lie, right? So
that is absolutely right.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the people that have been impacted by your organization.
Yeah, so we're relatively new. So I would say that the first people who benefited were folks who had firsthand experience with poverty, who we put front and center, not in an objectifying way or not on the stage to say, hey, say your words, I'll pat your back, and then you get off the stage and people will give money. And then tomorrow we have no idea what happened to you. That type of objectification is not of interest to me, right? I think we've done that. And I know that I'm answering a few things with your question, but isn't that what people do when they get asked a question? So what I would say to that is poverty and the poverty space is so filled with exploitation that even the people being exploited can exploit the people who are exploiting them. That's how it can work. And so we put somebody who's experienced poverty up on a stage, we make them talk, sometimes we make them cry. And I've seen this with the media too. You know, I've been a CNN hero and I've watched CNN come into my space, talk to people I've worked with and really, really encourage them to cry, let it all out. And when they do, you know what I heard next? Hey, that's the money shot, get that. And then they're gone the next day. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means their priorities are askew and they're not really looking at this humanely, right? And so they're looking at it from what can serve their interests. So I'd say that, again, people who are in poverty should have the loudest voice in this. They know the most about poverty. So we've helped some of those folks not only to amplify their voices, but we've helped a few start a nonprofit organization. One in particular is all the way through it and is receiving funds and providing services. And when we met her, she wasn't quite sure how to do that, right? So we want to help people who want to start organizations in their communities, because I think the best person to serve a community is a person who lives in that community. The other group of people who are starting to benefit are people who go to the forum and then can take an action and say, okay, maybe I've never been in poverty, but I really know that as one of us goes, so go all of us. So I see that struggle as a struggle I want to internalize. And how do I do it? And I think the best way is not just to take action. Don't just do something because it sounds good, right? Like we were saying before, do something that has evidence that it works, right? What's the evidence that something works? And that's what our national plan is highlighting for people.
Tell me a little bit about your national plan and some of the evidence-based research that you guys have done that will actually help end poverty.
So I'll cut to the chase on this one. I'll do you a favor and not go the long story first. I'll go the short story first.
Whichever one you want to do.
Thank you. You're very kind. The first thing I had to do to actually have a chance of better addressing poverty, and I don't say ending poverty in every sentence because I know there are very, very intelligent people who I admire who don't think we can end poverty. I think they're wrong about that, and I don't think it's just semantic. But let's skip that and go back to what I was saying, and that is I had to find an economist who understood the minutia of economic disparity and or economic opportunity, and who understood government programs, what worked, what didn't. And I was lucky enough to find that in Catherine Ross Phillips. So that was to me the indication that I could have success with this. Is I found a partner who had no ego and who knew a lot more than I did. And that was fantastic. It's humbling to work with somebody who is as informed as Catherine is. But what that has resulted in is a plan that lives up to the promise that I think I was putting out there for years. And so the long part of the story is just in 2010, which is about 9 years after I got into the poverty work as a nonprofit, I became very frustrated. And perhaps ironically, because I was standing on the field at the Major League All-Star game, which I believe is tonight. So it's really coincidental that we're talking. I know it's not going to air tonight.
Yeah,
so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it was in 2010, and I was recognized as kind of the nonprofit leader for the greater Washington area. So I represented the Washington Nationals. And there were 30 of us or so representing each baseball team, and we were on the field at the All-Star game. And I thought, this feels very empty. And I think it feels empty because I know I'm going to go back and very little will change for the people who are in poverty. And I recognize that that kind of an award, like every other kind of award, CNN Hero, Washington Tony of the Year, whatever, they bring awareness to your issue. But I think they're part of the problem because I think they make us think that we're accomplishing things or we're doing good things. Meanwhile, more people are struggling every day than are getting help every day or rising out of poverty every day, and it's not even close. So my frustration in that, I came back and I remember meeting with people and saying, look, we got to come up with a plan that can end poverty, not just treat the symptoms, right? We can't just give food or a bed to people because the numbers don't lie. And we are, more and more people are struggling. The violence, every year, how many years do we have to become indignant around Memorial Day because 50 people were shot in Chicago? It's every year. So anyway, I started to work on this national plan that would include everyone because I recognized that the nonprofit sector, it had become too institutionalized. People were looking at it as a career. It shouldn't be a career unless it's not your mission to solve poverty. And so when I say the nonprofit sector, Jamie, I need to step back and say, I'm talking about poverty work in the nonprofit sector. I'm not talking about health issues. I'm not talking about environmental issues. I don't know enough about those to talk to those. So I can just talk to poverty and say that there is not an urgency in the poverty space. And recognizing that, I wanted to come up with a plan that really coincided with my personal philosophy about life, which is that we are all part of the same whole. And I recognize that jumps into a kind of a woo-woo or a Pollyannish view of life, but that's how we exist. We're deeply interconnected. And if you were just to get a bigger perspective, right? Everybody always says, try to get a big picture perspective. Well, the big picture perspective on how we exist is we're deeply interconnected beings, right? If you go out into space, or if you just read what astronauts say when they look back into the, into the Earth and they say, gosh, all I saw was one hole and these artificial boundaries don't really define who we are. So I'll spare you a more deep philosophical discussion to say that I think we exist in a way that as one of us goes, so go all of us. So that as a guide made me say, let's all engage in this, right? Let's all come together. Poverty will be better addressed when we work together rather than kind of rely on someone else to solve it.
And what are some of the ways that you're helping people within the community do that?
I think what we try to do is give information to people, right? Really inform folks who live in communities. This can work. And what you're doing maybe is treating a symptom. So I would say instead of adopting a family for the holidays, I call something like that checkbox syndrome, right? That we want to check the box that we did something. And maybe we taught a lesson to our kids. And I will tell you, when you think you taught a lesson to your kids about charity and philanthropy, you probably did, right? I see that work. So I'm not negative about that. It's just not enough, right? What we're doing is not bad. It's just not enough. And we would feel that deeply if we lived in a community where you couldn't walk outside at night because the poverty created this air of desperation and scarcity, which doesn't lead to good things. I mean, the research on brain development and scarcity is almost enough, right? It's enough to say, okay, we need to do something to make sure people don't live in scarcity. And when you concentrate that scarcity, holy cow, that's a recipe for death, which we see every night. But I think the answer then is to say, okay, if we're going to help people get jobs, let's think really creatively, because there are a lot of job training programs that don't lead to jobs, right? I know many, many people who tell me, I'm not taking another job training program, Mark. I'm sick of it. There's no job at the end of that. I'm just going to start my own company, which is hard. As you and I know, it's really hard to start your own company and have it be successful and actually lead to generational wealth, which is a goal of ours, to replace generational poverty with generational wealth. That's not impossible. It's not hard. But what we could do is we could say to businesses, look, start to create some apprenticeships. And as you bring in people who have not heretofore had access to the labor market, think about what their obstacles are going to be. One big obstacle for them is going to be childcare. So instead of saying, I'm going to pay you 30,000 or 40,000, and you're going to watch 20,000 go to childcare, or I'm going to pay you 50,000 to make up for that, but not knowing that both you and your kid are now going to be at risk for walking in dangerous communities. I say to that, you know what? How about businesses and faith communities and universities start to work together, because there are a lot of people who are part of faith communities who want to do something substantial. They want outcomes from their efforts. And so they could become certified in childcare, and they could partner with a local business, not hard to do. There's a lot of faith communities right near businesses, and they could provide that childcare for the employees of that company. And that childcare could be subsidized by the company. There are a lot of ways to make this win-win-win. And that's the kind of solution that we're looking to put forth. And we're still nascent in this, Jamie, right? We're still new. And part of what we're doing is we've created this national plan that is at, I'm not going to say the website because that seems like a shill. You know what I mean? I don't want to do that. But in our website, there are a lot of great ideas, but they're not the only ones we're going to ever have. It's an iterative process. We're going to take some of the ones we have out and replace them with plans or programs that people in their communities tell us, hey, Mark, you missed it. This one works better. And here in South Dakota, where the poverty is rampant, in southern South Dakota, I mean, it's just awful, the lack of resources historically. And we're not paying attention to that. We don't even look at that as the face of poverty for the most part. But what we could do is say, you tell us what could work, and let's try it. And so that's part of the goal with the plan, is to rely on people in their communities to inform this plan. And then when they come up with a plan in southern South Dakota, you know who could really use that? People in Northwest Arizona, where the demographic is similar, and people are facing similar issues. And so I think that's what we want to do, is look at how do we serve as connective tissue. That's how I see us.
The thing I love about your organization when I started to learn about it is that I have talked, as you know, to hundreds of different organizations. And it is really refreshing to talk to someone that isn't just putting a Band-Aid on a problem for a minute, but trying to resolve the issue, like the actual deep down issue, to change the situation, and not just helps for that week or that month. And I do like when on your website, because you were just talking about this, you have something where it shows on the United States, like you can go to every single city or even every state, and it says how much it takes for you to get by, which I found that to be very interesting. So you can go to different places and kind of figure that out.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jamie. And I would say that one real metaphor for why we haven't solved poverty is we refuse to measure it accurately. So we don't even define it right. If you use the way we measure it as part of the definition, we say that the federal poverty line for a family of four, maybe 30,000 now. For so long, it's been in the 20s. You take your family of four or your family of three and try to live on the federal poverty line. You could never do that. And the reason they don't change the federal poverty line, the reason it's given often, is because nobody wants to be in the administration where poverty leapt by 50% or went up, because if you measure it accurately, then we're going to show that many more people are struggling. So the federal poverty line is a big part of the problem. We can't measure it right. We're not going to address it right. So we came up with a different line, and our line is not fancy or sophisticated, even though I have the most informed person as my partner. We just use 50% of average median income or area median income, because you have to look at this locally. The cost of living in Montgomery County, Maryland is a lot different than it is in rural Mississippi. So you can't use the same line. It's kind of like the argument for minimum wage. I think they're flawed. I don't think they're the way to go, because the cost of living is so different. So that's why I think that we got to address this locally. The environmental movement had it right when it said, think globally, act locally. I think that's right. Act locally and set the standards locally. So the National Poverty Plan standard is a local measure that's 50% of average income in that area. And it breaks it down beyond state, beyond county, into what are called PUMAs, or public use microdata areas, which are areas of about 100,000 people. So Western Montgomery County is not the same as Southeastern Montgomery County. They're very different places, and you need more money in one than you need in the other. So I think that if we're serious about this, we would use serious measures, and we would we would change the federal poverty line or just ignore it. And they try to ignore it. A lot of agencies use supplemental measures. There have been a lot of things developed over the years. And to me, that's another example of just not wanting to face facts. So the word Band-Aid, I'm so glad you used it because it's very, very true. We want to Band-Aid these things, and we never really solve anything and by treating the symptoms instead of the cause. And I would say that none of us act with our family at the symptom level, right? Like, so if you had an issue with your partner or your child, you're not going to treat it the same way we treat poverty, which is other people's children and other people's partners. So that's the issue. We don't personalize this, and we treat poverty as if it's the same as how many stop signs are we going to put up in the county, or where are we going to put speed cameras, and how are we going to address poverty. Meanwhile, no issue is unimportant, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we have 60 years of life and death going on in the streets of rural America, suburban America, urban America, and we have come up with what I think is a very shallow response. And until we get deep with this, until we kind of look at it as our own issue, we're not going to solve this. So our plan and our organization is an attempt for me to say, look, let's get serious. Let's put the urgency behind this that you would if it were your mom at the corner asking for money.
So how do you see your organization in the future?
I used a term a couple minutes ago, and I would say that that's relevant. I'd say connective tissue. That's what I want us to be. I want us to connect people from around the country that are doing really smart things to end poverty or to best address economic instability, and bring them together and say, look, this is what works in Spokane. Why don't you try this in Miami? Or this is what works in rural North Dakota. Why don't you try it in rural Mississippi? Try that. That's one way. And I think the second is as a source of information, right? The writing we do, the research we do a lot of reading and researching, but yet we're not a think tank. We're kind of like an action tank, right? We're trying to say, look, the point is not to think about this differently or talk about it differently. It's to act differently. Usually your actions follow your thoughts and your words. So that's fine. There's nothing wrong with thinking and talking about it differently. In fact, I want more conversation, but this is really about our actions, each of us taking action, an action that is, again, informed action that will produce outcomes.
So I'm listening to this and I want to get involved within your organization. How do I go about doing that?
Go to the action plan and identify with whatever sector you think you most want to do. Now there's 10 sectors, right? And so there's a sector for philanthropy, but there's also a sector for individuals, right, who don't associate with business or civic or healthcare, education. So pick whatever sector you might want to start with. It's really a two-click process. Pick your sector and then pick your area of poverty. Is housing most important to you, or most of interest, or is education, is basic needs? So you pick your sector and you pick your area, and it gives you at least 3 different actions you can take right away. So if you multiply that out, there's somewhere between 30 and 50 different things that you could do right away. Just pick the one that feels like, yeah, I want to start with this. And also, before you start, say, do I want to do this by myself, or do I want to do this with others? And if it's others, are there others who are in my business or in my faith community or in my family, right? You can do whatever you want. So it's really easy to get involved. In fact, if you want to get involved and you go to our national plan, you have to make a decision that, you know what, maybe I don't, because it's too easy to do something, to not do it. So I appreciate that question. I appreciate all your questions, actually, Jamie. I think that you're the kind of change agent that could make a difference in the community where you live. And I would say, that for folks who don't think they live near poverty, just extend out your vision until you bump into it, because it won't take long. If it's not in your home, it's in your neighborhood. If it's not in your neighborhood and it's not in your community, then it's right next door.
I was shocked at the numbers in Montgomery County, because you would think that a county that typically you would think is has a higher income bracket. There's a lot of poverty within this county.
Well, in trouble, but I'm just going to say that I lived in Montgomery County for a long time. I built an organization there. I met a lot of leaders, and many of my ideas came from those experiences. And what I would say is we are a purple organization, because there's not one side of the political aisle that can claim the higher ground on this. And that's true for decades and decades. And I mean that. Neither side can claim the victory here, and both sides need to find ways to change their approach. They have to change their approach, or else we're going to see the same results. And what I find especially troubling is how marginalized and exploited people in poverty are by both sides of the aisle. And that's troubling. But both sides of the aisle have a lot of people who could solve this if they decide to get serious about it. But they have to get serious about it. And it really, to me, it appeals to the essences of both political parties, if you will, right? In other words, I don't want to get too political, but on the right side, there's a lot about self-drive, but there's also a lot about community, right? And support of the community, and we're in this together. That's a big part of the right. It's not different on the left, community and being together in community. So your very principle of coming together is the essence of the Shared Humanity Project. And to me, it's the essence of the answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not so sure everybody has the greater social interest in mind. I think there may be more of a self-interest. And that self-interest, my side has to win, or my idea within my side. I mean, there's a lot of cannibalization on each side. And so I think that need for victory, that kind of ego test, we fail too much. Mm-hmm. And the people who always lose in these things are the people who are on the lower end of the SES. They're the ones who move the least out of that, right? If you take the 5 quintiles of socioeconomic status and you look at movement among all 5, the top 4 have a lot of movement back and forth. There are new, really ultra rich people all the time. And then they fall out of that, and there are new people who are really wealthy. Mm-hmm. But those who are at the lowest level, they don't move too much, right? That's why 97% of the people born in poverty in East Baltimore will never get out of poverty. Never, their entire life, 97%. That shows us that we could do it differently there. And it shows us, by the way, that the people who have been leading there probably don't care enough. And I would say that if you ask me, Mark, you seem like you bounce back and forth between nice things and angry things. I would say that's welcome to my head, right? And the reason that is because we care, right? We're compassionate people, but we don't care enough. We're not compassionate enough. I almost think we're conveniently compassionate, and that won't get the job done. This is too big. There's too much inertia that we have to turn around. Mm-hmm. But we can. And so here I go again, getting optimistic.
You know what? I feel the same way. I do the same thing in my head. So don't feel like you're alone.
Thanks.
I'm like, well, everybody wants to do all this stuff, but look at the numbers, right? It's like, it's not working. So before I let you go, first off, I want everyone to know, how can they follow your organization, your website, all of your social media? But then also, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important for people to know?
I would say that you have been such a phenomenal interviewer that I don't feel like we've left out anything. I would risk repeating myself, to be honest. But I would say that the one thing I want to drive home is this is not a tomorrow issue, and it's not somebody else issue. It's you. It's you who's listening or watching. This is your responsibility. Poverty is each of our fault, and it's each of our responsibility, and it's each of our opportunity. That's the truth about poverty. You asked me about truth, and that's the truth. It exists and it endures because we live disconnected lives, right? We think somebody over there is in poverty. I got to protect my own. As long as I protect my own, I'm okay. That's too small of a view of the human being. You define yourself too small when you think that your job is just to protect yourself and your immediate family or your friend circle. That's not enough. That's when we move on, we're going to see that was not enough. So we might as well embrace our full humanity here and say, you know what can I do? Never mind that I don't have enough time. That's also a myth, that I don't have enough time to help. We always have enough time for whatever we want to make time for, right? That's the truth of it. And so the truth is that we have judgments about people in poverty, whether we think we're afraid and we want to just do a little bit without putting our family at risk, or we think it's their fault, which, by the way, is a terrible myth, right? When you look at how people are in poverty, the number one reason is they were born into it. But that doesn't mean that they can't also, right? They're not absolved of responsibility for it. None of us are absolved of responsibility for this. So I say that again to drive home the urgency in this, that every day we don't do something about it. In Baltimore alone, one little part of our country, 3 people will get shot only because of poverty. And you could make an argument that there's other factors, that's fine. But the main cause is the economic instability and the scarcity. And we can address it. And by the way, that doesn't excuse that. I don't excuse anybody from doing anything. I just say, look, why do we all just tolerate it? Why do we tolerate these gross gross results of living a disconnected life. What if we tried to live a more integrated life, right? It's not impossible. We do it. We have towns that work, right? We know how to make it work. And that's why I say, Jamie, that this is to take action locally and expand your vision from your home outward till you bump into poverty, and then find a way that you can solve it. By the way, you don't solve it by being a savior, right? You solve it by finding ways to work with the community, to remove obstacles that families face, and to create opportunities. Those are the two ways I think you address poverty best. You remove obstacles people have to economic independence, and you create opportunities that nurture that. I don't know if that was too long of an answer for you, but
no, not at all. I've been loved speaking with you because I think we think the same way. So it's very refreshing to talk to you, Mark.
Yeah, likewise. And I'll just say that you asked how we get connected. So I would say if people want to reach out, email me. That's the best way, because I still live sometimes in 1988, right? So I'm still like, email. What a great tool this is, right? Never mind all the most cutting edge software. We use social media, but I would say in the fall, right? So it's interesting. I would say after Labor Day, we expect to go on a real attention and communications campaign to try to bring more urgency to this. Because, in the area where you live up in DC, I'm down in Florida now.
Lucky you.
Well, I live here because I like to provide some support for my folks. And so, how people, however, are kind of on a summer schedule. So we want to hit when everybody comes back and their attention's there. We want to hit it there. But my email is simply Mark, M-A-R-K, @sharedhumanityproject.org. And sharedhumanityproject.org is one of our websites. Our other website is nationalpovertyplan.org.
All right, great. And I'm going to have that all in the show notes for everyone, so you will not miss that. And Mark, I want to thank you again so much for coming on to speak with us. I've learned a lot in your national plan and how well thought out it is, and that you're really getting down to the specifics of what's actually happening and using the numbers and not putting a Band-Aid on it, like I said, and getting to the root cause. So I appreciate everything that you're doing. And I want to thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I love that, you're focused on bringing people together. That is the answer, and it's not a touchy-feely thing. It's the way that we will save ourselves from falling deeper into this crisis of fragmentation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think the last thing I'll say, and then I promise I won't say anything else, Jamie. I'll let you go. But the courage is the key here, right? And the courage to get out of your own kind of head and your own self-interest, and to be truly selfless in this. And when you have that courage, to me, the courage is the commitment, right? Mm-hmm. So make that commitment. Don't wait. And I hope we stay in touch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Mark. And then I want to thank all the listeners for tuning in to another episode of the Truman Charities podcast. Until next time. If you liked this episode, please make sure to rate and review our podcast. That is how more people learn about the Truman Charities podcast and our organization. And to make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes, subscribe. If you'd like to follow Truman Charities, you can follow us on Facebook at Truman Charities, Instagram at Jamie_Truman Charities, and check out our website, trumancharities.com.